Have you ever wondered if you could figure out the exact age of the Earth just by reading the Bible? I mean, for centuries, a lot of people were convinced the answer was hiding in plain sight, right there in the long family trees in the book of Genesis. The thinking was you could use them like a kind of historical stopwatch. So let's take a look at how that math works, and more importantly, where it starts to get a little weird.
And for a long, long time, the answer for many seemed to be a clear yes. The idea was that the Bible held this perfect, self-contained clock, just ticking away in those lists of fathers and sons. All you had to do, supposedly, was add up the numbers.
You know, on the surface, the method seems incredibly straightforward. Genesis chapters 5 and 11 give us these lists of patriarchs, and they tell us exactly how old each father was when his son was born. So you just add up all those ages, and boom! You've got what looks like a perfect, unbroken timeline stretching all the way from Adam to Abraham.
And when you actually do that math for the time between the Great Flood and the birth of Abraham, using that list in Genesis 11, you get this one very specific number, 292 years. It feels so solid, right? So neat and tidy.
Okay, but this is where it gets interesting. That clean little number, 292 years, doesn't really solve a puzzle. Instead, it actually opens up a whole new can of worms, problems that pop up both inside the biblical story itself and when you look out at the real world.
So here's the first big head-scratcher. If you stick to that strict 292-year timeline, something really bizarre happens. Noah's son Shem, the guy who survived the Great Flood on the Ark, he would have actually outlived Abraham by several decades. I mean, think about that for a second. The story of Abraham is super detailed, right? But it never, not even once, mentions that his world-famous ancestor from the Ark was still hanging around. It's a really strange silence in the text, and it makes you wonder if that timeline is as simple as it looks.
And the puzzle gets even bigger when you step outside the text. A 292-year timeline puts the flood somewhere around 2300 BC. Now, a global event like that should leave a massive scar in the archaeological record, a total reset button on civilization. But it doesn't. Archaeologists have found these continuous, thriving civilizations in places like Egypt and Mesopotamia that just sail right through that period, without any sign of a worldwide flood at all.
And this brings us to a really crucial question. When we're faced with these puzzles, we've basically got two options. We can either say, well, the text must be wrong, or we can ask a totally different question. What if we've been reading these lists for the wrong reason all along? This leads to a really fascinating alternative. What if these genealogies were never ever meant to be used as a calculator? Influential scholars like B.B. Warfield and William Henry Green, they proposed a different idea altogether, that the main purpose here was theological. It was all about showing a clear line of descent from Adam through Noah all the way to Abraham, tracing God's promised lineage. It was about who came from whom, not precisely when. But how can we really know that? Well, believe it or not, maybe the most compelling piece of evidence for this lineage, not chronology view, it actually comes much, much later in the Bible in a place you might not expect. Okay, check this out. Look at the genealogy of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew. It says Jehoram, the father of Uzziah. Simple enough. But if you go back and check the history books in the Old Testament, you find that Jehoram was actually Uzziah's great-great-grandfather. Matthew intentionally skipped 3 entire generations. He probably did it to create a tidy, symmetrical structure for his list. And that is a huge clue. It shows us that in the biblical way of thinking, father of could just mean ancestor of, which leaves room for some pretty big gaps in the timeline.
And it doesn't stop there. There are other clues that point in the same direction. For one, the Hebrew word for son can just as easily mean grandson or even just descendant. And here's a big one. Nowhere in the entire Bible do the authors themselves add up these numbers to give us a grand total. They never do the math for us. And finally, just like Matthew's list, the genealogies in Genesis are also organized into these neat, symmetrical groups of 10 names each, which really suggests a stylized literary structure, not a complete, exhaustive list of every single person.
The scholar B.B. Warfield, he's summed it up perfectly. He basically concluded that, based on how the Bible itself uses these lists, we are left, and I quote, wholly without guidance when trying to figure out a date. The text, he argued, just doesn't give us the data we'd need for that kind of precise calculation.
So, where does that leave us? What's the big takeaway here? If these lists aren't a stopwatch, how are we supposed to read them? And what does this all mean for the relationship between a text like this and modern science?
Well, it really all boils down to this. First, we recognize that the main point of the Genesis genealogies is to trace a family line. It's about lineage. Second, that means the Bible itself just isn't giving us the data to date creation or the flood. And that leads to the third point. It means questions about ancient history and geology are really scientific matters. They aren't theological questions that the text itself is trying to settle once and for all.
And that leaves us with one final and I think much more profound question. If the writers of Genesis weren't so concerned with telling us when things happened, what were they so focused on? What deep theological truths about God, about humanity, and about hope were they trying to communicate through these epic, sprawling family trees? Now that is something to think about.